Hey everybody, today I want to showcase my level 100 Whirlwind build that I actually used to complete a Nightmare Dungeon 75 and was pretty handily completing most Nightmare Dungeons up until about 70. Past 70 and especially around that 75 mark, it became very difficult to do them, but I still felt like this build was pretty good, so I wanted to share what I've been doing. I know a lot of people in my last video said like, oh, this is, try it in Nightmare Dungeon 60, you'll never do it. And I made a couple changes, and honestly, it's been working pretty well. Now, I don't think this is like maybe the most optimized Whirlwind Barbarian. I have seen some pretty interesting builds, new ones using Kick, that I think have been able to hit Nightmare Dungeon 100, and that's really great. Personally, I just wanted to showcase what I've been doing and not just like repeat whatever the most meta build is. So here's kind of my build. If we go down the skill tree, we'll basically be covering everything. I grab basically 2 points in Lunging Strike. We kind of have to anyways. But we're actually going to be using this on our bars for a reason I'll get into a little later. For Whirlwind, we're obviously grabbing 5 out of 5 points, and from our items, getting 4 more points. Then we're going to actually be getting Enhanced Whirlwind and going for Violent Whirlwind instead. That's right, we're going for Violent Whirlwind because I found that in higher Nightmare Dungeons, the most important thing was not actually staying alive, but was actually doing enough damage. I felt like as I got higher and higher, I just did no damage. So this was like an extra 30% buff to my damage that I thought would be pretty useful once you actually get going. And to get our bleed, we're actually going to be using two-handed sword expertise. So we're not using two-handed axes, we're using two-handed swords. Now, I think there could be an argument, I think, for using the Furious Whirlwind and then using the axe expertise. Personally, I just found that this did a little bit more damage, and it was more consistent, and I wasn't relying on the bleed as much. And I wasn't I wasn't relying on the vulnerability window quite as much. Okay, over in our defensive skills, we're of course getting 3 points and everything from our amulet. That's why it's 8 out of 5. But we're going to have 8 out of 5 Rallying Cry. We're going for Enhanced Rallying Cry, and we're going for Tactical Rallying Cry. Again, more Fury, more resource generation. We're also getting 5 points in Challenging Shout, with Enhanced Challenging Shout for more bonus life, and Tactical Challenging Shout for some more Fury. Now over here, we are going to be taking War Cry. Again, triple shouts, pretty standard for Barbarian. We're going for Enhanced War Cry, and we're taking Power War Cry for the damage bonus. And here's a bit of a change that I made. I mean, 3 out of 3 Booming Voice is great for the shout skill duration, but I also went for 3 out of 3 Guttural Yell, so I have 12% less damage from enemies. And I also have Raid Leader. This is going to heal your allies, which includes yourself, for 2% of your life per second. Now, this does stack with multiple shouts, so if you have all 3 shouts going, you're getting 6% of your life per second. It's pretty damn nice. I kept 3 out of 3 Swiftness. I think you could drop this if you wanted to and put it into something else. But personally, I thought this was pretty good, and it definitely helps for like clearing any dungeons that you're pretty efficiently and killing things fast with. I actually took the points out of Fury generation and the damage reduction while berserking. I just felt like I had so much Fury. I was either I had 100% Fury or I had like no Fury at all. So I didn't really think this was necessary, and I'd rather put those points in somewhere else. Over here, we're still going to have 3 out of 3 Pit Fighter for the increased damage. Again, a big thing with these endgame builds is we're looking for as much multiplicative damage as possible. And then I'm going for No Mercy for 18% crit strike chance against stunned, slowed, or immobilized enemies. The slowed is the most important thing here because we're going to be getting our bleed through our two-handed swords, and then we're taking 1 point in hamstring so that everything is slowed. As a result, this 18% crit chance is always online. Again, 3 of these points are coming from our amulet. We're also getting 1 point in Thick Skin, which is basically just to set up counteroffensive. While you have Fortify for over 50%, you deal 12% increased damage, and again, more multiplicative bonuses to really pump out as much damage as we can in these higher keys. Over here, we're taking 3 out of 3 for Tempered Fury. This increases your max Fury by 9 because we're going to be using Rumelodnes, which is going to increase your max Fury. And then we're going to go for Wrath the Berserker, Prime Wrath the Berserker, and Supreme Wrath the Berserker. Pretty standard. And of course, for your key passive, Unbridled Rage, you get so much Fury generation with swords that this is really just the best choice. You're pretty much always going to be max Fury, and if you're not, you can of course go unconstrained, but you should be able to get Unbridled Rage pretty fast. Now, again, we talked a little bit about two-handed sword expertise. We're doing this so that we have some way of consistently applying bleeds, which is, again, going to set up your slows and whatnot. But bleeds aren't like a super important part of the build. If you do want to go for more of the bleed-centric with Furious Whirlwind, you can. And then you can also try to put 3 points into Cut to the Bone so that your bleeding effects deal a bit more damage. But again, I don't think bleed is like the most important part of the build here. Now, let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this build. Why is dual wield swords so effective? Again, it all starts with Ramalodnes. This weapon is absolutely cracked. Obviously, I have a really decent ancestral sword, but the important thing is the effect here. Skills using this weapon deal 0.3% increased damage per point of fury that you have, but you're going to lose 2 fury every second. Now, that 2 fury every second sounds kind of scary, but if you think about it, Whirlwind is like 37 fury. It's dumping fury really fast. An extra 2 fury per second doesn't really matter. And as for max fury, I have 200 max fury. So that's about 60% more damage from the sword, which again is a lot of damage. It's a huge multiplicative bonus to all of your damage. It's why I think dual wield swords is probably one of the most effective whirlwind barbs out there. The other stats aren't as important. Physical damage, damage with dual wielded, but the lucky hit is a little bit nice. When you do proc your lucky hit, you're getting, a lot of your resource back. So that's great. Also, one thing to talk about as far as swords go is that whenever we are using swords, we have a lucky hit up to a 10% chance to gain 5 fury when hitting a crowd controlled enemy. Again, remember, everything is going to be crowd controlled through our bleeds and our slows. So we're actually going to be using 2 swords because this is going to double that chance. So we're getting a 20% chance when we lucky hit to gain 5 fury. This is just really going to help with your fury generation. Now, unfortunately, killing a crowd controlled enemy grants 15% attack speed. That unfortunately does not work because attack speed does not work with Whirlwind. I did have a lot of people tell me that, so thank you guys for letting me know. And this is kind of like an unfortunate part about Whirlwind. I really think that Whirlwind would be so much better if it did scale off attack speed, because this build would get just so much better if you were able to get this attack speed bonus and not completely waste it. Now, let's actually go ahead and talk about the rest of the gear. Over in our helmet, we're going to be running Numbing Wrath, and we're looking for cooldown reduction, max fury. You don't need to go for willpower. You can just look for all stats or strength. I just needed some willpower for my Paragon board. And then you're also going to be looking for maximum life. And again, Numbing Wrath, you can see it looks like I kind of cheated here, where it says 36 fortify. Basically each point of fury generated while at max fury grants 36 fortify, which is more than the 12 to 24 roll. Basically, some codex abilities actually scale off of your level from the Codex of Power. So I actually got this directly from the Codex of Power, imprint it, and it was a 36. I think some of the others work like that too. So just give it a try. Your Codex might actually be a lot more powerful than you think once you get to the higher levels. Over in the chest, we're not actually running the Rage of Haragath anymore. And the biggest reason why is that, honestly, we just need more damage reduction. Wasting your chest and your pants for uniques when they're pretty much your primary source of damage reduction is actually kind of a huge waste. So instead, we're going to be running this. This has maximum life, damage reduction, total armor, and damage reduction while fortified. All of these are great stats. We could also look for ranks to challenging shout, but I think that these are fine. And for the legendary aspect, we're going for Iron Blood, gain 2 to 4% damage reduction for each nearby bleeding enemy. Of course, everything is bleeding, so as long as we've hit like 5 packs, we're basically getting 20% damage reduction, which is awesome. Over in the gloves, we're running Berserk Ripping. Now, I don't think Berserk Ripping is great for this build. It's certainly not like build defining, and you do have a couple other options you could do. You might want to go for like Grasping Whirlwind. Additionally, if you wanted to, you could put Anemia in here. This is the boot one. Direct damage against bleeding enemies has up to a 30% chance to stun them for 2 seconds, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but you could put Anemia here and then run movement speed in your boots as well. Okay, so what else are we looking for in the gloves? 4 ranks of Whirlwind. Lucky hit chance is okay, but there are some other stuff you could get, like strength and all stats. Lucky hit up to a 5% chance to heal 1200 life, and some crit chance. Crit chance and ranks of Whirlwind are the most important. If you want to go for this lucky hit build, you can try it. I kind of liked it because it works well with Anemia and does give you a little bit more fury. But, again, I think lucky hit would work a lot better if attack speed actually worked with Whirlwind. For now, it's just something I've kind of been trying out. You can try to go for strength and all stats instead. Now, Boneweave Falls of Disobedience. We're running Disobedience in our pants because it's basically the best defensive legendary aspect in the game. It gives us a lot of armor whenever we deal any form of damage. This includes bleeds, so it's actually really easy to get full stacks, get that 50% extra armor. It's also really important to note that when you start entering packs, it is a little bit dangerous because you don't have your Fortify, you might not have Challenging Shout going, and you don't have any stacks of Disobedience. So when you first run into a pack on some of these higher nightmare dungeons, you can like get one shot from like almost anything. You got to be a little bit careful when entering a pack and get those stacks going. Also, this makes armor pretty valuable. So, look for percent armor in your chest as well as your pants. You can also get armor, I believe, from your helmet. Now, over here, we're going to be getting damage reduction from distant enemies, total armor, and damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding. This damage reduction from distant enemies could be damage reduction from close enemies, but again, more damage reduction is totally fine. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the boots. This has a lucky hit. Direct damage against bleeding enemies has up to a 30% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. I'm running a lot of lucky hit in this build, and I actually found that anemia was a really cool component that let me kind of stun lock when I was dealing with like a single target mob, as well as in general, it would spread some stuns, and that would actually give me some survivability. I wouldn't just get one shot when I entered a pack. I would actually be able to stun a couple mobs. I don't know if this is like the greatest thing ever. It's a little hard to tell for sure because lucky hit in general is not the most reliable. But there were a lot of times where I had a very easy time killing one elite or one champion left by just stunning it over and over and over again. Whirlwind has a decent chance It's like 24% lucky hit chance. So with all the other lucky hit modifiers, it does end up proccing more than you might expect. And you're not like permanently stun locking stuff, but I like it. If you don't want to run anemia, that's fine. You can also go for the movement speed ones like Ghostwalker, which gives you movement speed when you're unstoppable. Also a great option. Now, for the stats, this is pretty much movement speed, berserking duration, movement speed after killing an elite, and fury cost reduction. The base movement speed, the berserking duration, and the fury cost reduction are all pretty important here. I would definitely look for that. You don't need the movement speed after killing an elite, but personally, I think it's just the best one. Now let's talk a little bit about weapons. Over on the two-hander bludgeon, remember, we're just using our dual wield for our abilities. So that's the only thing that matters as far as DPS goes. Your two-handers are just stat sticks. Now for the two-hand bludgeon weapon, I'm looking for Dire Whirlwind, and I do have a perfect roll here. This is going to increase the crit strike of Whirlwind every second it's channeled up to 48%. As for stats, I go for vulnerable damage, strength, all stats, and crit damage. That's pretty much perfect. You definitely want to be going for a lot of vulnerable damage and crit damage because one of the things that Romuladnis cannot roll crit damage and vulnerable damage, so you really want to make sure you're getting that from the rest of your weapons. I really like Dire Whirlwind on the two-hander because this gets me very close to crit cap once I've actually started channeling. And again, we are going to be using that ability. Where was it? Remember, Violent Whirlwind? You're dealing more damage after 2 seconds, so you have a lot of incentive to be holding for 2 or 3 seconds and then trying to keep that whirlwind going as long as possible. Basically, if I actually look at my crit, I have a base crit chance of 24.2. With Whirlwind, I'm getting another 48. And with No Mercy, I'm also getting 18. So with all of that, I'm sitting at 90% crit chance after I've channeled for 3 seconds, which is really powerful. If you can get to crit cap, you should definitely do that as well. Get crit from your gloves as well as your rings, which we'll talk about a bit later. But if you are getting really close to crit cap, you don't need to roll crit chance on your rings. That's actually what I did. I took crit chance off my rings, but now I need the crit back, basically, because I swapped a couple things around. Okay. For our one-hand weapon, I like to run Edge Masters here. You can also run Edge Masters on your necklace instead, but I run Edge Masters here. Now, the weapon rolls aren't that good. I have crit damage and I have vulnerable damage, but damage to close and damage to slowed isn't the greatest. It's not awful, but remember, Whirlwind snapshots where you started. So a lot of the times, if you started spinning a while back, your damage to close is not actually getting that buff because it thinks that Whirlwind started a long time ago. That's why suppressor mobs are really annoying for a Whirlwind because it thinks that your Whirlwind started as a ranged projectile, and then when you actually move into the suppressor, it still thinks that it started up. Basically, it snapshots the location, which means damage to close isn't as good. Mainly, I'm running this because it's 813 item level, which is a lot of DPS, and I do want as high DPS on my dual wield weapons as possible because they make up the core of my kit. Over on the other two-hander, again, this one's really close to perfect. We got vulnerable damage, crit damage, strength, and all stats. Absolutely amazing. DPS doesn't matter. And for the legendary aspect, we're of course running Limitless Rage so that we can get the double bonus. This basically means that every point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill 4% up to 60%. Very important that we always make sure we have full Limitless Rage before we start our Whirlwind. Now let's talk about the Amulet. As far as stats go, this Amulet is pretty ridiculous. We got 3 ranks of No Mercy. Again, that's 9% crit chance basically all the time. We got 3 ranks of all defensive skills, which is going to be for our Challenging Shout as well as our Rallying Cry. We have 16.7% Fury cost reduction, which is close to perfect. And we got 5.8% cooldown reduction. Not a great roll. Really, the most important things that you're looking for here are going to be the ranks to all defensive skills, the Fury cost reduction, and the cooldown reduction. Now, ranks to No Mercy, I think is the best one, but if you can't find that, it's okay. This is going to be really difficult to get a perfect amulet like this. For the legendary aspect, I went with Expectant. Basically, attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill by 15% up to 30%. This means that if we attack twice, we're getting the full bonus. And the idea behind this is that when we start our Whirlwind, we want to have Expectant going. So this is going to do 2 autos, then you start your Whirlwind. On top of that, you want to make sure that you're basically at full rage when you start. That way you have your full Edge Masters, that 20% bonus. And you want to make sure that your Limitless Rage is ready to go. If you have all 3 of those buffs, you're going to get a really good snapshot of your Whirlwind. It's going to do a lot of damage. If you're not being vigilant about that, you're not making sure that all those conditions are met when you start, your Whirlwind's not going to be doing your full damage, so really make sure to focus that. And once you do start your Whirlwind, again, we want to be channeling that full duration, 2 to 3 seconds. We want to keep going as much as possible so that we're not having to stop and, get all those conditions lined up again. Again, we don't have to run Expectant on the Amulet. I think that Edge Masters on the Amulet could be a little bit more damage. And then if you move Expectant to your weapon, the only thing to think about is that instead of 2 autos, you're going to have to do 3 autos now to get that 30% bonus. That 30% isn't going to make or break your build, but just keep in mind it's a little bit more damage, so that way when you are spinning, you're spinning for big numbers. Over in the rings, we're of course going for Bold Chieftains. This means that Shout skill, whenever you shout, your cooldowns are your cooldown of the shout is reduced based on nearby enemies up to 6 seconds, which is really easy. And then we're also going for Echoing Fury. Your shout skills generate 4 fury per second while active. These are basically mandatory for any build that's going triple shouts. As for the stats, I was kind of wrong about this. I don't think max fury on the rings is actually optimal. I think for rings, you're looking for crit damage, vulnerable damage, resource generation, and probably crit chance. If you're crit capped, you can go for max fury or lucky hit instead. But yeah, crit damage, vulnerable damage, resource generation are the 3 most important. This one has 3 of them, and I am running max fury, which again, it does help your Ramalodnis, which is good, but crit chance would probably be a little bit better. Over here, we got resource generation, lucky hit chance, crit strike damage, and vulnerable damage. Again, I think that's 7% lucky hit chance. I think I would rather have some crit chance instead, but it's kind of hard to say because, again, lucky hit chance is it's difficult to really evaluate for the total DPS of your build. So just look for those stats. Those are probably going to be the best ones. And again, that's the entire build. As for gems, we run greens in our weapons. The reason why I like greens is because you cannot slow bosses, meaning that the only thing that's going to help you do more damage to bosses is going to be green weapons. And yeah, bosses are kind of hard in the higher nightmare dungeons. And as for gems, I like to run red gems just so I have a really nice, healthy life pool of 14k. You can also run blue gems as well, but I found that red gems are just a little bit nicer to avoid getting one-shot by certain things. Okay, finally, let's talk about the Paragon board, okay? And this is a complete level 100 Paragon board. So, if you're level 70, you might not want to go with this board. You might want to look at my speed farm or my earlier videos that showed sort of the leveling progression. And I'll talk about it a bit, but I don't want to make a million caveats for the board. Okay, so starting here in the starter board, we're going to path up. We're grabbing Brawn. We're also going to get Tenacity. We're getting Iron Strength, and we're getting Raw Power. Here, we're going to be putting Exploit. And the pathing's a little weird, but it's basically to hit all of the Dexterity nodes. That way, we're getting 39 points of Dexterity here, and that's plus 30% vulnerable damage. Again, we really want to juice up our Exploit so that we're getting a lot of vulnerable damage. Over in the second board, I'm running Flawless Technique. We're getting Brash for damage reduction from close enemies. And we're getting Heavy Blows for crit strike damage with one-handed weapons. Over here, I'm also running Ambidextrous. This basically gives me 8% increased damage while wielding one-handed weapons, but it also gives a bonus to all the magic nodes within range. Now, why do I run Ambidextrous in this board? It's because this board has crit damage, and I want to be buffing crit damage. It's probably the most valuable stat. I want to be buffing my crit damage, and I also like getting this extra damage reduction from close enemies, because usually you're taking damage from things that are close. Now, on our way out of this board, we also run up and grab Havoc. Again, this is some more crit damage and some more physical damage. And then we path our way into the third board. Third board over here, we have Decimator. We start by grabbing Pillage for a little bit more vulnerable damage, and we just path to get these vulnerable damage. We don't really need the 50 armor. And over here, we're going to go for Martial. Martial reduces the cooldown of your other shout skills by 1.2 seconds. So this is pretty useful to have your shouts as close to off cooldown as possible. But in addition, it buffs all magic nodes. So what are the magic nodes here? They're vulnerable damage nodes. Again, we want to be buffing the crit damage nodes, and we want to be buffing the vulnerable damage nodes to really get the most amount of power. And as for our rare nodes, we're grabbing Arrogance. This is damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. I don't think this is the strongest effect ever, but it does help. And then we're also going to be getting Demolish. So this is 20% vulnerable damage. Pretty much, it's one of the best things you can get. You should definitely try to get that. Oh, speaking of vulnerable, I don't think I mentioned, but I do get 3 out of 3 pressure point. I have seen some people cut this, but I just don't think it's correct. I think you need to get pressure point on your build. Otherwise, you're going to have a really, really wacky time where you're going to be spinning around and doing nothing for like 15 seconds waiting for your exploit window to come back up. Now, maybe that's the optimal way to play at like Nightmare Dungeon 95s, but honestly, I don't like playing that way. I think pressure point's better, and then try to look for your vulnerable procs through there. Okay. So once we finished up with Decimator, we're going to move up into Weapon Master. Again, we're not getting Weapon Master, but we're going to be pathing. And the pathing is a little bit interesting. I optimize it this way. You don't have to optimize it this way. But over here, we're going to be grabbing Undaunted. This is a willpower node that gives damage while fortified for every bit of willpower. And as well as you're getting 10% damage reduction the more fortified that you have. And basically what we do is I do it this way so I can get every single willpower node here, 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 all over the board. And we're also grabbing Raw Power for more physical damage and strength. And we're getting Iron Strength for, again, more armor, more strength. Before we head out, we're also going to grab Hunter Killer and the surrounding movement speed to elites and damage to elites node. This one's great. It's just going to help you kill elites. Really helps with speed farming as well for this movement speed if you're doing slightly lower Nightmare Dungeons. And once we've got everything that we need in here, we're going to move our way into the 5th board. This is going to be Warbringer. But we're not actually going to be getting that. Numbing Wrath is actually enough on its own just to give us the fortify that we need. Because we're always like fury capped, it actually gives you so much fury, or so much, it's going to give you so much fortify that you really don't need this. Instead, we're going to make our way into the glyph socket and put in Wrath, and we're going to absolutely just slam with as much dexterity as possible. There is a lot of dexterity nodes. I think 7 nodes that you can get here, which is really good. No, maybe more. I think it's 9. It's a lot of points to your dexterity. I also grab Raw Power for more physical damage. And then before I head out, I also make sure to grab Core Reserve, which gives me more Max Fury. Again, this is really good for Remelodnes. More Max Fury, a little bit of life, and some more Max Fury. And on the other side, we're also going to grab Hungering Fury in the surrounding nodes. This gives us maximum Fury, as well as Fury on kill. So really, this is just going to help our resource. This is why we don't need to go as heavy in resource in the skill tree. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about before I get into the final one is that in general, you can see I did try to optimize this to get as much strength as possible. The reason why I have this 6th board here is that I'm able to hit my final check here of 520 dexterity. This is 530 willpower, and this is 540 willpower. Once you add a 6th board, those requirements are going to go up to the 600s, and I'm not able to get 630 dexterity. So as a result, once I've safely met all of these requirements, I just try to go for as much strength as possible. And this is why I like to put Blood Rage here, because I don't care about these rare nodes as much. The two rare nodes here are damage to bleeding, which is good because things are always bleeding. But at the end of the day, it's just 10% damage. And then this one, damage reduction. Luckily, I am able to hit the willpower here to actually get the 8% damage reduction. Really, the reason why we go into this one is so that we want to pick up Disembowel. This gives us physical damage over time, but physical damage over time is not a core part of our build, so we don't actually need to pump this with willpower. We just need enough to hit that 25 willpower so that I can activate the additional bonus, where killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your non-ultimate active cooldowns by 1 second. This is going to help a lot with your shout uptime, and I also like to go and kind of get Blood Rage here. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant Berserking for 5 seconds. This is just going to give you a little bit more Berserking uptime, which I think is really beneficial. It's going to help a lot. And again, Whirlwind is one of those builds that I think really excels in the situation. Maybe not at like super high-end 75, 80s or whatever, but when you're in that like 50 to 60, even 60 to 65 range, and you're able to kill things pretty fast and just keep moving and keep that Whirlwind uptime, that's where I think this build really shines. That's where I think this build is great. And honestly, unless you're intentionally going out of your way to push for Nightmare Dungeon 100, I think that the best spot to farm is probably going to be in that like 50 to 65 range anyways, where you're kind of efficiently moving from pack to pack, basically killing things in a couple hits. And I guess this makes me want to talk a little bit about Nightmare Dungeons as a whole. I don't know if I really like Nightmare Dungeons all that much. Once I started pushing, it was fun for a bit, but it gets to a certain point where basically everything one-shots you. You kind of have to get lucky with the affixes, because certain affixes like a resource burn or crit strike reduction are just completely impossible to do. And it got to a certain point where, I was watching other people playing Whirlwind Barb, and it really just felt like they adopt this like kite strategy where you walk in, you do damage for like 3 seconds, and then you're basically running around for 15 seconds waiting for your cooldowns to come back up. And I just didn't have as much fun playing that as it seems others do. I'm not that interested in pushing for Nightmare Dungeon 100, and if I was, I think I would rather just play Hammer of the Ancients anyways. So I guess this brings me to just like my final point about this build, and that's that I love Whirlwind. I think it's been great, but the point of Whirlwind for me always was to create kind of like a speed farming build, something that moves at 200% speed at all times, that's going super fast, it's beating all my friends, one-shotting every mob around, and something that's going to level me to 100 as fast as possible. And you can see here, I am level 100, so Whirlwind has basically done what I set out to do with this build. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I did manage to complete a Nightmare Dungeon 75 with this build, with all of these changes to be more, defensive. But I really think that ultimately I would have more fun playing that speed farming guide and just kind of going nuts with my friends. So this brings me to my final point about the Whirlwind Barb, and there will be my full, I have a Nightmare 71 that I completed that I'll be linking the entire gameplay for. But I guess for my final point is that, I'm really happy with Whirlwind. I'm really happy to see people picking it up, especially the dual wield version. And I hope it continues to get, reiterated and built on. But for the most part, I think this is going to be it for me and Whirlwind. Instead, I'd like to keep making builds that are designed for more of that like level, I guess like they're designed to like clear level 100 content, maybe like tier 50, tier 60 dungeons. And I'm going to be actually working on my dual swing frenzy with LeapQuake. There's a couple cool things that I've been thinking about. I think that's going to be the direction of my builds moving forward. I'm not as interested in fully optimizing this and like spamming dungeons until I finally get like 100 done. So again, guys, remember, we do have the full gameplay of the 71 coming up, but I do want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Okay, let's try the 71 out. It's got Stormbane's Wrath, burning damage. The physical resist is pretty bad, but hopefully we can still do it. Blind Burrows is like a pretty easy dungeon, so... and then I have spider damage as well, because I do need spider damage. But when you start channeling, I think the most important thing is that you always have Edge Masters and Expectant going. But if you can do that, then you will do pretty good damage. With the spider caves, one thing that is really annoying is you kind of have to like constantly go and get more health potions, because they just do so much damage. But that's just something to keep in mind. And then Stormbane's Wrath will one-shot you, so just like always keep that in mind. Kite away from it appropriately and just keep your eyes out on it. Because it will just one-shot you, there's just nothing you can do about it. And when the storm or the spider hosts, when they explode, they also will probably one-shot you. So if I die, it's usually going to be to those two things, or like a... Kind of depends on the dungeon. There's usually just always something that one-shots you, but usually it's something that explodes on death. Okay. First pack done, pretty clean. I have a nice channel going into this guy. If I'm able to do like a pretty good amount of damage here. And when I need more health orbs, I'll just go grab them. It's totally fine to do that. I think some people might think it's cheesy. I don't care. If I need health orbs, I'll go get them from the down. It's just the way the game works. I don't know, but so far so good. And I did have a 79. I had a really good 79 of blind burrows going, and I completely choked it. Oh, it's not fair to use this. This is actually kind of cheating. I might have to wait a bit. Okay, I think I'm going to wait out the shrine. This is kind of unfair to use a shrine. It's like, okay, yeah, obviously you can kill it if you get a good shrine. Fine, I'll just do this one pack with shrine. That's cheating, though. Sorry, guys. My run's invalidated. Okay. Anyways. Oh, I'm like totally full on bags too. Whatever. Okay. Anyways, so with blind burrows, it's very easy. You just have to go kill the guys, the 3 infested villagers, and they're not too bad if you don't have like crazy hard affixes or something like that. One thing that can be a little annoying is sometimes they'll get vampiric, and if they get vampiric, they will actually heal for like half their life. So just be really careful about that. But usually the hardest part in this dungeon is just finding like a spider that's just like absolutely cracked. So I'm coming to another one here. Again, I'm going to start my channel absolutely perfect and then go into him. That way I'm doing like max damage. And in my vulnerable window, I get like almost half of his damage done. And now I can like walk around, kite a bit, clean up, wait for my cooldowns, and come back in. Again, I'm playing around Stormbane's Wrath because, yeah, it will absolutely destroy me. That guy did have vampiric. Man, I have a clip of me fighting one on the 79. Okay, here we go, dude. That's one down. This one's joke. What the hell? What was that heal? I think I spent like 5 minutes there because I kept making mistakes and I kept getting hit by this freaking vampiric. Oh, and then on top of that, it also had life regen too. So it was regenning 1.5% of its health every single second on top of vampiric. So if it hit me, it would go from like 30% to like, oh wow, we got a butcher. I don't know if I can do a butcher. Suppressor's very, very difficult because you just don't have a lot of room to do anything. Just try to get it done and then pray for anemia to stun so you can actually do something. But honestly, it is like the most annoying thing. I honestly don't know if I can deal with the butcher. I might just die. It's like he does nasty damage. I have one more left. What the heck? How have I never... Oh. I might just reset the butcher here, honestly. I just have like no packs, so it's... Okay, killed me through the floor. Alright, that's whatever, dude. I don't really care. Okay, we got our last guy over here, so should be fine. How did I miss this? That's so weird. So again, start our channel, hit twice, make sure we have full rage, then we start going. Ideally, you also want to channel for 2 seconds before you start hitting, but, you know, it's not perfect. You're never going to get, like, the perfect setup. But yeah, really kill him. Pretty easy. And remember, this is with 30% less physical damage. Like, we would be doing so much more damage. We just have that flat 30% reduction. Okay. I think when you have packs of 3, it's a little tricky because you kind of want to kill them one at a time, honestly. But then also, if you haven't touched one in a while, it doesn't hurt to like go away and then move to the other guys for a bit, just so you can like proc your vulnerability again, do some invulnerability damage, and then move to the others after you've kind of like, you know, done your whole thing. Again, another pack. Oh, Fire Enchanted. These guys are really, really hard because you actually have to dodge everything, and it's really hard to see what's happening under their feet. I really like just kind of like slow kiting away, and then once you have the Fire Enchanted on its own, it becomes a lot more doable. But Fire Enchanted on top of like a huge pull like this is really hard. You can see here I'm hitting twice, making sure I have full energy, starting my channel, and then moving into them. Alright, and now it's a lot, it's still kind of hard, but I can at least sort of see the fire lines on the ground, which makes it a little bit easier to actually do something. Okay. I think we got, like, most of the annoying affixes. I'm just going to take this for now. I don't really care too much about loot. And we do have a boss coming up. But I think the boss should be okay. Okay. So here's, like, one trick that you can do, right? Is let's say I'm going to the boss. I'm going to actually get my expectant procs off spiders. You can also get it off, like, rocks sometimes. But that way I have my 30, I have my 60, I have, like, full energy. And when I start this fight, I am basically, like, I'm kind of able to pump some pretty big damage, like, pretty fast. I don't have to, like, hit it to get going or anything like that. Also, with Stormbane's Wrath, it is super annoying for these bosses. Something you can try to do is, like, move it around. You can try to, like, move the Stormbane's Wrath to get it started. I like to do this with Shades, too. Just so that's not right on top of the boss. Because sometimes it'll just, like, camp the boss. And you can't do anything. When I have, like, no rage and nothing, and there's, like, a million things going on, sometimes I'll just kind of run around and just wait for my cooldowns. There's no harm in that. It's just how it is. You have to do that. And, yeah. Now I got the vulnerability. I can full channel, get all my stuff back. And there's also the opportunity for me to, like, get everything going again. Pop this, and now I'm, like, back to, like, a perfect channel with Berserk and Wrath of the Berserker, so. Oh, man. And again, I'm just always keeping keeping an eye on that Stormbane's Wrath. It will one-shot you. Probably the hardest part is just getting used to that. Is like, yes, every affix in the game will just one-shot you now. You cannot step on anything. Oh. I'd probably die there if I don't have Challenging Shout. So unfortunately, I kind of have to like kite around right now, just because the Stormbane's Wrath's like camping the boss. Circles like this are kind of nice because you can kind of like bug their AI a lot of the time, which is, you know, hey dude, don't mind me, I'll take it. All right, and that's the boss. Pretty sick run. I'll throw away some of this stuff just so I can pick up my loot, but yep, 71 blind burrows, not bad. GG's.